Hey everybody, welcome back. Here we are, Antietam 158. We really appreciate you joining with us. So many friends that we recognize on the feed and whatnot. Make sure you share this with your friends so as many people can experience this battlefield, especially during all this remote time where not as many people are traveling as possible. So thank you to you all for participating. Now, if you've been keeping track, yesterday we covered a lot of the campaign, and even in the days leading up to it. This morning we've already kind of covered the cornfield, the bloodiest 4 hours at Antietam. And at the end of that fight, or I'm sorry, in the middle of that fight, you're going to have, and Brian Barrick's already mentioned it, some Louisianians occupy that fence way over my shoulder over there, and I think you know the result. They start dueling with some Wisconsin soldiers on the other side of that fence when all of a sudden some of Doubleday's men, I think it's Patrick's brigade, comes up partially behind the Louisianians, and the slaughter is absolutely terrible, and that slaughter is in part captured by Alexander Gardner and his crew. I believe took 5 photos of the soldiers along that fence, and remember, 4 killed for every soldier, I'm sorry, 4 wounded for every soldier killed. So you could just imagine what a terrible slaughter that must have looked like at the time. But that's just indicative of that one part of the field. And at some point we'll be showing up flashes of the Antietam burial map, the Elliott burial map that we're all using so much, and you can just see how deep the slaughter was along the Hagerstown Pike. But that fighting eventually peters out. The Union pushes on, clears the whole cornfield, and moves on toward the Dunker Church, okay? That sort of allows, and I think we mentioned this in our overview video, a little bit of time for a new Union Corps to come onto the field. That is the 2nd Corps, the largest corps in the Union Army, and a big division, 5,000 soldiers under John Sedgwick, is going to begin to push into this area. To talk about that, let's bring on Doug Adelman. You know him. Lots of our videos formerly of the Trust.
Hi, good morning. So, yes, the 1st Division of the 2nd Corps, or rather the 1st Division to arrive of the 2nd Corps, is actually the 2nd Division under John Sedgwick. Uncle John Sedgwick is 37 years old. He's a confirmed bachelor. He is loved, universally loved by everyone. Chris is shaking his head at me.
49.
49. I thought that seemed a little...
Class of 37.
Class of 1837, 49 years old, confirmed bachelor, universally beloved by all of his fellow officers. And he's commanding 3 brigades. The first is Willis Gorman's going to command the 1st brigade in, followed by Napoleon Dana and his brigade, and then last the Philadelphia Brigade, today commanded by Oliver Otis Howard. This division is arguably the best division of the best corps of the Army of the Potomac. It is certainly the freshest corps of the Army of the Potomac. These men in Sedgwick's division have not fought in anger since June the 30th. Since the Battle of Glendale. They have not been under fire for any considerable length of time since then. So they are charging through this field completely fresh and ready to go.
Good, good. And let's bring them up a little bit. Here they are. Maybe they're going to push all the way onto the Potomac River and anchor into that area. They could unhinge the Confederate retreat at this point, but I think you know it doesn't exactly happen that way. Just by way of reminder, Sedgwick's division is part of the 2nd Corps that's under Bull Sumner. Remember, he's got 3 divisions, one of which comes here, and the other 2 veer off to their own destiny at the Sunken Road that we might talk about a little bit later. To really unpack this and talk about this strange formation in which they come into line, let's bring on Kevin Pawlak, a licensed battlefield guide at Antietam, and works for Prince William County at various locations, Ben Lomond, and at the Bristow Station battlefield that you, the members of this organization, have helped us to preserve along with our partners. So if I say something and Kevin says something different, trust Kevin.
Thanks, Gary. Good morning, everybody. So as Sedgwick's division arrives on the field probably about 8:45 on the morning of September 17th, in the area of the East Woods, as Gary mentioned, just 2 of the 3 divisions of the Union's 2nd Corps will be the first to cross, and that's going to be Sedgwick's division, followed behind that by William French's division. When Edwin Sumner arrives, he really doesn't get a good sense of what's going on the battlefield. By this point, Joseph Hooker has been wounded in the foot. He's drifting in and out of consciousness, is carried from the field. He does talk to Sumner a little bit, but exactly what he says to Sumner and what information Hooker provides to Sumner is really lost to history and debated to this day. But when Sumner arrives on the battlefield with Sedgwick's division in the East Woods, he can see a little bit of fighting going on in the northern section of the West Woods. He sees Union troops under the command of George Greene down near the Dunker Church and where the Visitor Center sits today. And what Sumner realizes is, as he sees it, that this woodlot, the West Woods, is the key to the battlefield at this point. Confederate troops are here reorganizing, rallying from the drubbing that they took the morning of the 17th in the area around the cornfield, and some fighting in this area as well. And so Sumner is going to move with John Sedgwick's 5,400-man division. Rather than going north to south like the previous Union attacks had been earlier that morning, instead it's going to go east to west. And Sumner's idea is to get possession of the West Woods and then swing his massive division towards the south and start to roll up the Confederate line back towards Sharpsburg. Now, if we had been standing here 158 years ago watching Sedgwick's division move across those open fields to my left, we would have seen an incredible view. The 1st Brigade of Sedgwick's division out in front stretched 4 regiments long under the command of Willis Gorman, former commander of the 1st Minnesota, which is a member of of Willis Gorman's brigade. The next brigade back about 50 yards behind, and remember each of these lines stretches about 500 yards in length. The next brigade back is under the command of one of my favorite generals at Antietam, one of the greatest named generals of the entire Civil War, Napoleon Jackson Tecumseh Dana. And he has units in his brigade, 42nd New York, the 59th New York, and the 19th and 20th Massachusetts, the Harvard Regiment, as it's better known. And then the brigade bringing up the rear of Sedgwick's division is under the command of Oliver Howard, known as the Philadelphia Brigade. And this area in the West Woods where we are standing now becomes known later on in the aftermath, or at least the memory of and the formation of Antietam National Battlefield, as Philadelphia Brigade Park, because of the monument that's sitting here just to my left to the Philadelphia Brigade, the tallest monument on the Antietam battlefield. So it's a very large, imposing formation to anything that's going to be in front of it, but of course, obviously, it can be very vulnerable on either flank. But Sumner believes that because of the Union troops in the northern section of the West Woods and down near the Dunker Church, that he has that protection on his flanks when he comes into the West Woods. The 2nd Corps and Sedgwick's division are not the only ones moving, though, on the battlefield at this point. By 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning, Robert E. Lee is shifting his lines quite a bit as well. He has pulled John Walker's division from its positions down originally near the Burnside Bridge to start coming up in this direction. Also, he's pulled his 2 reserve divisions from west of Sharpsburg. That's under the command of Lafayette McLaws and Richard Anderson. And both of those divisions are starting to move. Those divisions were exhausted and not quite as fresh as Sedgwick's men that would advance here into the West Woods. McLaws and Anderson's 2 divisions had actually arrived in Sharpsburg literally at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning of September 17th. In fact, when the orders were given for McLaws' division to advance, Lafayette McLaws was sleeping in a field of tall grass, and when he woke up from his nap, he realized that his division was gone and was moving towards the northern end of the battlefield, and so he had to quickly run after and find his command, but he would join them before their attack here into the West Woods. So by this point, there's a lot going on in this area by 9:30, 10 o'clock on the morning of September 17th. But one last point I will make is that by this point in the morning, Robert E. Lee has 90% of his infantry north of Sharpsburg by 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. So he is looking not just to reestablish his lines, but potentially to deal a crushing blow to the Army of the Potomac's right flank and maybe drive it back into Antietam Creek if he sees that opportunity to do so. And the fighting that takes place in the West Woods is perhaps going to be one of the greatest opportunities that he's going to have on September 17th to do that.
Good. Thanks, Kevin. Make sure, again, you share this with your friends or with the American Battlefield Trust. This is Antietam 158. And, we're going to pick this up, but we're not going to quite, carry you all the way into the battle yet. We'll make you watch another video for this, but just know that a lot is going on in other places. Remember, as this fighting for the West Woods is just going to start heating up, so are the Union soldiers who are attacking the sunken roads starting to move. And other things are happening elsewhere on the battlefield. At some point, you're going to even have a whole new Union Corps, the 6th Corps. Oh my God, McClellan didn't have 500,000 troops in reserve and leave them all there? No, maybe he actually started to move some of his reserves in toward the battlefield, so we're going to talk about that in a second. First, I want to go back, give you a couple more quizzes. Again, our friends from Ancestry are going to give away some subscriptions to Ancestry and perhaps Fold 3 as well. I'm going to mention 2 words sequentially in a well-known quote, some more well-known than others, and you have to tell me the circumstances on the comments, and you might win yourself an Ancestry subscription. So let's go with a few here. Mere question. Who said that in a quote? How about least excuse? Okay, these might be a little bit connected. Something stays. That's a post-war quote there. And probably the hardest of the group, letters, U.S. Who said letters, U.S. In regards to something in the Civil War? Ponder that, put them into the comments as you will, and let me bring Kevin back up a little bit, because before we bring up Jim Broomall, a guest we haven't had on yet, at this point, let's Kevin bring the 6th Corps across the field. When is that happening, Kevin, and what's going on here?
So, spoiler alert, we'll get into it in more detail at the next video, as Garry mentioned, about what happens to Sedgwick's division. But Sedgwick is going to be driven from the West Woods back towards the North and East Woods, and so there will be a minor Union counterattack consisting of 2 regiments, the 13th New Jersey and the 2nd Massachusetts, that will move from the East Woods right in the direction you see behind me there, where the Indiana Monument is and the New Jersey Monument, with Captain Hugh Irish waving his sword on top, the 1st New Jersey officer killed in action here at Antietam. But in terms of the 6th Corps, they don't begin the day on the Antietam battlefield. In fact, the morning of September 17th, they are still down in Pleasant Valley. McClellan will call them up the morning of the 17th. After a pretty grueling march, the 6th Corps reaches the battlefield about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, and then shortly thereafter, McClellan sends it to the west side of the Antietam, and starting at about 11:30, noon, somewhere in that region, the 2 divisions of the 6th Corps, about 12,000 men under the command of William Franklin, will arrive on the battlefield. And the 6th Corps is meant to be both a stabilizing force here for the Federal right flank. Remember, the 1st Corps under Joe Hooker has taken close to 30% casualties. The 12th Corps under Joe Mansfield and then Alpheus Williams suffers about 20% casualties. Sedgwick's division is going to be pretty bloodied up here, and so Franklin is supposed to stabilize the Union line here. But then also, William Franklin gets the idea of staging another attack into the West Woods, similar to what Sumner and Sedgwick had done on the morning of the 17th. The 6th Corps won't do all that much fighting, comparatively speaking, to the other corps of the Army of the Potomac, but out of the 12,000 men that they have, they'll lose a little over 400 casualties in one attack that's led by William Irwin's brigade towards the Dunker Church, and then the 7th Maine is going to be sent on a forlorn charge, basically, towards the evening of the 17th. So only about 400 casualties overall. But one of those casualties was the medical director of the 6th Corps that was actually on William Franklin's staff. And I'm going to bring in Jim, and Jim's going to come in, I guess. Garry waved me on. So Jim is the director of the George Tyler Moore Center for the Study of the Civil War at Shepherd University. It's like I went there. What do you know? So Jim, take it away.
Well, thank you all very much. I deeply appreciate the invitation. And as Kevin said, I want to sort of personalize or individualize this overarching story. And so on a day like this, we can get lost in the carnage, right? 23 Americans killed, wounded, or missing over the course of one day's action. It's absolutely horrific. But what about the individual figures that sort of drive this narrative forward? And the one that I think we want to focus in on today is a rather sort of anomaly, an odd experience, but it suggests something much more broad about the trauma of combat. And so indeed, as Kevin said, we will talk today about Surgeon William White. Full name is William James Harrison White. And White had been in the pre-war Army. He had been across the western states, the western territories. He had had some experience leading up to Antietam, but by and large had not seen really the horrors or terrors of battle. And throughout the morning of September 17th, 1862, he goes immediately into action, and he seems to be executing his duties quite efficiently, quite effectively. But then at some point in that late morning, early afternoon, something seems to sort of snap or change in his persona. And what follows is, in one description of the period, a most singular death. And in this instance, he comes up to William Franklin, and the 2 men are looking across the field, and then he kind of matter-of-factly says, "Give me some regiments, and I'll take those woods," pointing off in this general direction. And these woods, of course, are filled with many Confederate regiments, to which Franklin quickly retorts, "You can't take that with 50 regiments. And then White, quite bizarrely, then heads off on a charge on his very own. And as he gets within about 100 yards of these Confederate soldiers, he's immediately killed, 1 bullet to the head and 1 to the chest. Now, this incident immediately starts appearing in the New York Times and other newspapers as they're trying to sort of figure out what happened to this individual. And some suggest the heat of the day, some suggest battle fatigue, and I think I would argue that this is a clear indication of the traumas with which this one individual has experienced, and perhaps he's been simply pushed too far on this battlefield, seen too many sights, and simply is gone beyond the realm of human comprehension. And he reacts in this most singular way. I think what's also interesting about this incident is in the post-war period, it's more or less lost in the narrative. And so what was this quixotic charge by one individual becomes just another fatality, as post-war accounts suggest he is simply killed in the action while in the company of Franklin. But I bring this one incident to attention today to suggest some of the long-term effects, the perhaps terrors of this field. And to sort of close this off, the fields beyond us here, one of the most fought over portions of this battlefield, gave witness to these men scenes that were both sort of terrible and sublime. And so while the story of the 2nd Massachusetts will be picked up here in a minute, I think it is useful ever so quickly to close off this part of my story, at least, to turn to Robert Gould Shaw, of 54th Massachusetts fame, but at this point, a relatively young, unseasoned officer in the 2nd Mass. And as Shaw is walking across these fields that have gone back and forth over the course of 5, 6, 7, 8 o'clock that morning, he sees two scenes that he must sort of juxtapose in his mind and comprehend. And the first is, of course, the slaughter on the cornfield itself. He talks about the mass of dead and wounded men, a sight that he describes as quite terrible, something that he has to avoid, quite literally. As he's moving along, the men are literally writhing on the ground around him. But so too, as he watches Sumner's Corps advance, is he struck by what he describes as a grand sight. It's something sublime. And so over the course of these battlefields, we see these forces clash, the terrible and the sublime, time and time again. And only by combining them together do we get a more holistic image of what these battlefields look like, and more importantly for my interests, how it impacted the individual soldiers. And so with that, I believe I'll turn it back over to Garry. And again, thank you all immensely for your time today. And thank you, Garry.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for all that you've done at Shepherd University and, in your writings to really bring the common soldier to life. I actually, when he said he was going to start talking about William James Harrison White, I was like, oh, wait, I've seen a picture of him. There's Harrison White, except that's a much different Harrison White. When you've got 120,000 soldiers fighting at one particular place, you're going to have some overlap. This Harrison White looks like a Confederate, but you see, you come to learn that he's actually a Union soldier with a U.S. belt etched in. It's not the best photo in the world, but this is in William Frazanito's book, Antietam, The Photographic Legacy of America's Bloodiest Day. And what's interesting about him is that he would die, probably shot through the body at the Dunker Church, and he is the first cousin of George McClellan. And he lingered in a hospital for a while. Did McClellan know his cousin was here? Did he know he was wounded? Did he go see him? Did he know of his death? We don't know. Now, we're going to pick up with another video as we get into the West Woods. That's behind Chris White and behind the camera, and we will pick up with what's going to happen to Sedgwick's division as they move into those woods. What is Lafayette, McLaws, and others going to do to this division? I think you know.